Thank you. It really is an honor to be here. I was able to visit this church a few years ago, and now here I am standing up in front of you all. But I bring you greetings from the saints at Trinity Reformed Church in Moscow, Idaho. And so, greetings to you. And, well, this is a delightful time. So, I hope that you brought Bibles with you. If you were my students, I would have you hold it up and repeat after me. I am a Bible bringer. I have pleased Dr. Schlect. And then I would make everyone else who didn't hold their Bible up say, I am not a Bible bringer. Anyway, but Proverbs chapter 6 is where I want to begin to kind of offer some opening reflections here. Proverbs 6, in a passage that I trust is familiar to many of you. Proverbs 6, beginning at verse 6. Go to the ant, O sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. She prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. This is a positive vision cast now for diligence in general, but I would like you to think about its application for parenting. I might say, go to the ant, O parent. The ant's a model of constant work, of steady work. The ant works for the long game. Look at verse 8. She prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. Now, of course, ants, if you take an entomology class, you'll probably learn that ants don't actually prepare bread. The ant does not collect food by harvesting. Obviously, an ant is a metaphor. The ant's a stand-in to relate to us something that's true about people. But what's the truth that the ant is telling us here? The lesson of the ant is this, that diligence today reaps rewards tomorrow. Diligence today reaps rewards tomorrow. The ant is a model of hard work and delayed reward. Labor now, blessing later. It's a familiar principle that applies to all kinds of pursuits, and it certainly applies to parenting. Go back to the text in verse 8. She prepares her bread in the summer and gathers her food in harvest. Because the ant was diligent in the summer, she gathers her food in harvest. So what is the parent's harvest? The parent's harvest is adult children. Adult children who are industrious, who deploy their talents to act fruitfully in the marketplace and they serve others. Adult children who faithfully contribute to the life of the church. Adult children who establish households of their own, who are devoted to their spouses, who raise children, their own children, to be fruitful. Adult children who rest on Christ for their salvation. This is the parent's harvest. If the harvest metaphor presents the optimistic outlook for the diligent, the text also lays out a warning for the not so diligent. And this is where we could pick up at verse 9. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber and want like an armed man. Now, bear with me here. I'd like to take another crack at verses 9 through 11 that I just read, but this time with some liberties. How long will you lie there, O inattentive parent? When will you rise from your inattention? A little parental inattention, a little parental neglect, a little putting off of your parenting and leaving it for another day, and your children will emerge as ill-prepared, ill-equipped adults, and perhaps even unfaithful adults. And they will come upon your household like a robber. It might seem outlandish to apply to parenting, but I think it's warranted. I think it's warranted even in this passage, and I invite you to fast forward down, still in Proverbs chapter 6, but down to verses 20 and following. Notice how the text itself highlights the relationship between parent and child. Proverbs 6:20 now. My son, keep your father's commandment. Forsake not your mother's teaching. Bind them on your heart always. Tie them around your neck. When you walk, they will lead you. When you lie down, they will watch over you. When you awake, they will talk with you. For the commandment is a lamp, and the teaching a light, and the proofs of discipline are the way of life. Notice back up in verse 20, it addresses a father's commandment and a mother's teaching. What is so important about a father's commandment and a mother's teaching? The instruction that mom and dad provide when the little ones are, little, is instruction that guides them when they're adults. These verses connect the parenting you do today with what happens later on in your child's life. Parents are responsible for the first few chapters of what is actually a much larger story, the story of your child's life. And you need to parent with this realization in view. I would suggest a lot of parenting failures arise from treating the season of time, that season when your children are under your roof, as a whole story complete unto itself. This is a sort of dispensational approach to parenting, if I may. When your child, as though your child's childhood inhabits a different dispensation from their adulthood, their childhood, it is a separate and distinct existence, a season of life that operates according to a different set of natural laws, a different set of covenant obligations than adulthood. Don't view your kid's future adulthood as though it is somehow disconnected from the present, from their childhood in the present. Think of your kid's life as a chapter in a long book. And these first few chapters, when the kids are under your roof, the under your roof chapters, are setting the stage for the later chapters in your kid's life. And it's the same story. There's continuity between the early chapters and the later chapters. That's what Proverbs 6 is suggesting here. And of course, you have a lot of editorial control over the early chapters of this story and very little editorial control later on. You are setting up the story of your child's life. That's either a good story, a happy story. It could be a troubled story. It could be a tragedy. But you are setting up this story. It's just where you are. I'm not saying you should be setting your kids up. No, realize that you are setting your kids up. That's the way it is. And so, with that opening reflection, I want to talk about the manner of my approach both tonight and tomorrow broadly. Tonight, I'm actually going to talk about older kids. And if you have older kids, I hope you'll find my remarks helpful. But if you have younger kids, preschool age kids, I'm excited to hear that there are parents yet to be, people who are much younger and not even perhaps married yet. I'm excited that you all are here. I think that even the older kid stuff is going to be applicable to you. In fact, no less applicable to you. The best way to think about parenting is to start with the end. To start with the end in view. Start by imagining kids as adults and then work your way backward. Think about the day when they move out. And of course, they've got an adulthood beyond the move-out day, let's hope. But just to drop into this moment in time, on that day, when they move out, on that day you'll want them ready to hold down a job. Have you set them on a trajectory for that? And not just any job, but a career job. Are they ready to choose a spouse? Are they ready to set up a household as husband or wife? Ready to be parents themselves on that day when they move out. That's the move out day. Now then walk backward from there. If your kids are 16 or 13 or preschool, or if you're pregnant or looking ahead to that day, you should ask yourself, how will I prepare them for move out day? How will I prepare them for move out day? And tonight, I'm going to be talking about parenting the older kids closer to move out day. And tomorrow, I'm going to push back earlier, starting with that end and then push back earlier and talk about parenting younger kids. But I hope that by talking about working with older kids, it actually makes a whole lot more sense of what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. I actually think this is the foundational time, foundational for thinking about younger kids. All right. So my first point that I want to move into then, what actually is my central point for tonight and extending into tomorrow, which is that you need to parent in faith. And it ties in with what I was saying with the ant. And of course, that sounds like a happy platitude. Anyone going to disagree as Christians, disagree with the proposition that we should parent in faith? It's an easy audience for me to say this in front of. But faith is essentially a peculiar way of looking at the future, a peculiar outlook on the future. Your thinking about the future should be dictated more by the promises of God and less by what you see in front of you. A faithful outlook on the future should be disciplined and enraptured by the promises of God. That should be what guides your posture toward the future, your attitude toward the future, your reflections upon the future, more than what you see in front of you. Faith is defined in Hebrews 11:1, a familiar passage. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. When you look at your teenager, if you have a 16-year-old, you kind of see that they aren't ready for that move-out day, maybe. The kid does stupid things. Is this kid ready for real responsibilities? Does he really understand a lot about the real world? How about the 13-year-old? He doesn't possess marketable skills, at least not enough to support a household, makes bad judgments. Your kid is not ready to lead a business. He's not ready to be ordained as an elder or deacon at age 10. Not ready to take on the responsibility of marriage and child rearing at age 8. Don't let these observations of your child dictate how you think about your child's future. Don't let these observations distract you from the promises of God for your child. Take your cues about your kid's future from the promises of God and not from your teenager's behavior, capacity, actions, or whatever. That, I suggest, is parenting in faith. That's what it means. We're in Proverbs here. Turn ahead to chapter 22. Proverbs 22 now. Again, a familiar passage for a parenting seminar. Proverbs 22:6. I know many of you probably know this. Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. But I would invite you to look at the context. This is one of those passages that oftentimes gets parachuted in out of nowhere. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. But rewind back up to verse 3. The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it. The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life. Notice the future orientation. In verse 3, the prudent are those, the prudent, of course, are those who look ahead. The prudent see into the future. Here they're anticipating danger, looking ahead to see danger, and so they act now. And so they act now in order to prevent that future danger. In verse 4, they hold out for future reward. They see reward in the future, and so they act now. Turning to verse 5, thorns and snares are in the way of the crooked. Whoever guards his soul will keep far from them. Here again, a reflection on the future, about the way ahead. When you consider the future, you look out for thorns and snares and you anticipate them. The text speaks of guarding his soul. The very notion of guarding is anticipatory. It's future-oriented, it's future-looking. And now verse 6 comes on the heels of all of that. And so, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Again, this is one of those verses that's become cliche. But the thing about cliches is they're true. They're not. This is not a novel verse, and so they become truths. One of the challenges with cliches is that they're dropped in there, and then we don't meditate on them because they're maybe too familiar. This passage does not tell parents to train up a child according to how the child is. Notice this is conspicuously not what it says. Train up a child in the way he is, and then when he's old, he will turn out whatever is going to make of that. It's train up a child in the way he should be, in the way he's going to be, and the script of what he's going to be is written in the promises of God for your child. The script is not in what you see in front of you. This underscores my main point to parent in faith. Parenting in faith means treating your children better than they deserve to be treated. Regard them as if they have achieved more than what they have actually achieved. In fact, this is how the Lord treats us. Parenting in faith affects many things. And I want to highlight a couple of practical areas now, but I want you to think about that as a foundation for parenting in faith. I want to highlight the area of how you talk to your kids, and then how you hand over responsibility to your kids, part of training them up in the way they should go, anticipating the adults that they will become. So first, how do you talk to your kids in a way that is parenting in faith? There's a future orientation in how you should interact verbally to have exchanges with your kid. You should keep their future before them, and you should keep it before them in a hopeful way. If you were to ask your kids, what do your parents think of you? Would they say, my parents are disappointed in me regularly. I often disappoint them. Would your kids say that they regularly come up short of your expectations, that parents don't trust them? Here's maybe a more probing question. Is your delight in your kids contingent upon the works that your kids perform? Does your approach to parenting catechize your kids into justification by works? Or are they assured that you're in their corner, that you are with them, that you are pleased with them, that you are confident in their future, even when they're fearful of their own future? Your confidence outpaces theirs. When you gauge the future that lies in store for your kids, again, do you rest more upon God's promises as a gauge for their future, or do you look to their performance as the gauge for their future? Do you show your kids that this is how you see them? You should paint a brighter future for your kids than they can paint for themselves. And this is where faith comes in. And you need to speak words of faith to them. You need to speak the promises of God to them. But you need to speak to the promises of God to them, which means to put them into the narrative of God's promises. And so it needs to get granular, highly pixelated, detailed in their circumstances as you teach and interact with them. So I would hope, and think about this, as you look to your son, would your son think, Dad thinks I have a great career ahead of me? Dad's nuts. But Dad thinks I have a great career ahead of me, the 6-year-old thinks. The 8-year-old, the 14-year-old thinks. Dad thinks that I'm going to be a great dad. And he talks about being a grandpa. That's, To my kids, and I'm 10, that's a great thing for a 10, and that should be sort of shocking for a 10-year-old, eyes like saucers for a 10-year-old. Well, that's the vision that you want to cast for your kids, and it's your vision that you're imparting to them because it's the vision that the new covenant gives that you're casting and preaching to them. That you believe your daughters are on their way to becoming great moms. That in your view, your sons and your daughters they're on a trajectory to be leaders in the church, to serve other people. They're going to have gifts that are going to bless many people in the church, and you look forward to seeing that day. Should the Lord bless that you can see that day, and you should talk about that to your 12-year-old. I learned as a coach. I coached mock trial. It was a pretty successful mock trial team. We went to the national tournament, beat the California champion a couple of times. Got beaten by the California champion other times. But I have to mention that when I travel to other states. I bet we beat your state champion. So it's sort of oratory, debate kind of combined, and the kids would stand in front of, they would be in real courthouses, real courtrooms, judges. I remember when my son was on the team, he had to speak and argued in front of the Chief Justice of New Mexico with photographers around him. But in that experience of coaching, one of the interesting things was, the uniform was a suit, okay? And it's really interesting what happens when you put a suit onto a high school freshman. When you put a suit onto a high school freshman, there's this awkwardness that lasts just a little bit, but the kids act up to the suit. The kids wind up acting up to the suit. Well, that's how you should talk to your speech to your children should be like that suit that they're going to grow into, that they're going to act up to one day. If your little girls play dress up and they try to balance in the heels, and it's kind of hilarious, and the heels stick out 3 inches past their heels, the heels of the shoes, that sort of thing. Your speech to them is like dress up, except that you're not just playing around. That's the difference. It really does bring them into the reality. Place them into a narrative. So they should hear you say things like, well, when it comes time for you to buy a car, what kind of car do you want? How are you going to do that? How are you going to get that? What do you think you're going to look out for when you're buying a car? That you say to your 10-year-old. What kind of house do you think you're going to buy one day? Son, before you know it, daughter, before you know it, you're going to be a great parent. You're going to be a great mom. In fact, I bet you'll be a better mom. Mothers would say this. You'd be a better mom than I am, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. Your speech should be laced with that so that your kids are convinced that you are nuts. Your kids are convinced that you're nuts because your kids are probably looking at themselves and their capacities. Don't join them in that. Lead them to the promises of God and what God has for them. That's what they need to be led out of and away from. Your job as parents is to take the lead in expressing confidence in your kids. You need to express that confidence in their presence. You need to say it directly to their kids, and you need to say it around them. Talk as though their future success should be the most normal thing in the world. Talk about their future success in the workplace, in the family, in the church, in the community. And now, of course, I'm not saying that you should be overconfident. I'm not saying that you should be arrogant. So what's the difference between arrogant talk and faithful talk? Between parenting confides, confidence, with faith on the one hand, and presumption on the other. Arrogance arises when you place your trust in the work of your kid. Arrogance arises when you place your trust in your own work of parenting for those outcomes. But a proper faith is when you place your faith in the work of Christ on behalf of your kids and what Christ is doing in your parenting for them. This is the corrective to arrogance. This is the corrective to arrogance. Our Heavenly Father looks at you and He sees the perfections of His Son, Jesus Christ. Sunday after Sunday, you come into this hall, you worship, and the pastor proclaims upon you an assurance of pardon, of forgiveness. You're welcomed to the table. You're welcome to the table. Our Heavenly Father actually looks at you and sees the perfections of His Son. He sees the perfections of His Son. So come to this table. That's how He sees you. Earthly fathers should look at their sons and daughters and see the perfections of Jesus Christ. And so earthly fathers need to talk that way, around them, to one another as husband and wife when you get discouraged. When your kid does something right, acknowledge it and connect it to something that matters about their future, and acknowledge that Christ is doing a work in them. That was great stuff, son. Keep it up. One day, son, I'll be looking to you for when I apply for my next job. Frame their activities within a narrative. That's just what's going on with the ant in Proverbs chapter 6. Everything they do, frame it in a narrative. Frame it in a narrative. And a narrative means that you've got many chapters ahead yet to be written, but these chapters are always foreshadowing. You're always having spoiler alerts as faithful parents, because God has told us that we have spoiler alerts. That was a hard assignment at school, and you handled it well. You know what? I can just imagine when that day when you're at a job and you have this task with an absurd deadline and an unreasonable boss. How you handled that school assignment, that's just setting you up. And you're not going to be that kind of boss, right? All right. Suppose your daughter's working at a restaurant. Some guy asks her out, and she holds her ground, brushes him off, comes back home and tells you the story. You're going to say, oh, that is just so great. You know what? One of these days, you say to your 16-year-old daughter, 17-year-old daughter who brushed off some guy, one of these days, you're going to have a lippy teenager when you're a mom, and you're going to know how to handle it. And I know that from how you handled this moment at work, right? Because you're going to be a mom one day. That's really going to be a useful trait, and I already see it in you. That's just great. Parenting in faith, again, means speaking in a way that connects your kids to the future. Okay, it affects how you talk. It affects the narrative that you color your counsel and interaction with. So that's how you talk with and around your kids. But it also, in the second place, parenting in faith affects how you hand over responsibility to your kids. And you need to hand over responsibility to your kids. Your kids are going to leave the house. Do they know how to do laundry? Okay, so when's that going to happen? When are they going to learn that? Are they prepared? Probably before age 10, they should be involved in the laundry. I mean, that's probably when they start handling the machinery. And there's been laundry tasks well before then. I remember my wife, we had 5 kids, and they were 8 years apart between oldest and youngest, so they were all fairly close. And so Brenda, when she would go shopping, she had quite the little entourage around the cart at the grocery store. And it's interesting, Brenda would always shop on Saturday morning. What's fascinating is that all 3 of our adult daughters, who are moms to all 3 of them, still shop on Saturday morning because of Brit. But anyway, she would go there, shop on Saturday morning, the big entourage, and with the older ones, they'd start venturing away. Okay, you're going to go get this, and you're going to go get that. And then they'd spring free from the shopping cart and go to the next aisle. There might be some Schlect kids in opposite ends of the store and then reconnoitering with the shopping cart as the home base because there's some responsibilities being handed to them. As our kids got a little older, I remember this. It was summertime, more flex time in the schedule, and so we had a regime where that some of our kids had already moved out, but our older kids, our son and daughter and I would take a night of the week to prepare the meal. This was all Brenda's doing, all Brenda's concocting. So like my son Bennett would have Wednesday night, and so the whole family, okay, don't blow it, Bennett. Like he's got Wednesday, and then whatever Bennett prepares on Wednesday night, that's the family meal. And then whatever Lizzie prepares on Thursday night, that's the family meal. And Brenda shops when? Saturday morning. They had to have the ingredient list into Brenda on Saturday morning for that Wednesday or Thursday meal that they had to prepare. Otherwise, now they've got to fend for it. All right. So hand over responsibility for them, understanding that they have a future, and before they're ready for it, just a little bit before they're ready for it, so that they can grow up into it. I remember taking my boys, I did this with both of my sons, took them in to see a financial advisor when they were in late high school, early college. As soon as they got jobs that started paying fairly decently, they weren't getting rich or anything like that, but they had some income, and so I took them in to see a financial advisor. There was a great Christian financial advisor, kind of sat them down and got laid out their categories and helped them to think about this. And they're learning, you know what, I have to get advice from some people for stuff. Dad, I'm not the best financial advisor. I have to outsource that to people who know what's going on. But the principle is this: you want your kids to cross that threshold into adulthood, and when they cross that threshold, it should not be abrupt. It should not be an abrupt crossing. It should be just something that it should almost be like, oh, did that happen? As your kids near that threshold, as they're near that threshold, what it means to be an engaged parent changes. Now, and think about this, as your kids are approaching teenage, you're going to be an engaged parent in the teenage years like you were an engaged parent prior to the teenage years. But the script is going to change. The choreography of your engagement starts to change. In fact, you're never going to be done parenting. You're never going to be done parenting. I'm in my mid-50s. My parents are just entering their 90s. I'm blessed that my parents are both still alive, and I still need my parents. But of course, the dynamics are different. The dynamics are different. It looks different. So you're always going to retain that parent-child relationship, but the nature of the relationship is changing. And the essence of the change as your kids get older, but before they leave the home, is this, that someone has to be responsible for them. That responsibility shifts more and more away from you and to the kids themselves. And that responsibility needs to shift while they're under your roof still. Don't let it shift so that they have the abrupt change later. This means a transition for you in your parenting role from being your kid's caretaker to being your kid's counselor or guide. You need to counsel and guide your kid who is more and more and increasingly taking care of himself, taking care of herself. Again, not a dramatic shift, because you're looking ahead even when they're little. So you add on more and more responsibility over time. Start moving them out from home to face the world. So again, once your kid reaches 7th grade, your kid should be managing his or her own deadlines. If there's confusion over the instructions about a school assignment, if your kids are in day school, and I know a number of you have your kids at different schools here, by the time your kids are getting into high school, parents should never step in and ask on behalf of the kid. The student should ask the teacher, not you, not the parent. Suppose you're going out of town, and so your kid's going to miss class on Friday. Suppose your kid has to be at a doctor's appointment on Tuesday. Whatever the case may be, have your child be the one who informs the school. Now, it could be that you need a parent permission slip or something like that, and there's some paperwork to do. I understand you can take care of that, but when's your kid going to do that? It should happen before they leave, and so get out of their way. I'm at New St. Andrews College. I have deadlines imposed upon me. I hear from the dean, I hear from the provost and other colleagues. They hand down instructions to me. When the dean gives me an instruction in my workplace, does the dean copy Joan Schlect? Why not? Why not? Joan Schlect is my mother. Well, your kids, before they leave home, they need to be managing these things. What have you given them to manage? Now, before your kids leave home, you want your kids dealing with adults directly rather than through your mediation. What if your kid's teacher is being unreasonable? What if your kid's coach or dance instructor is being unreasonable? Or maybe your kid is waiting tables at a restaurant, flipping burgers at In-N-Out or whatever it is you do here in California. What a great opportunity to coach your kid through the process of dealing with an unreasonable adult. Make them deal with adults. And you're going to talk it up with, okay, so here's what you're going to, now what's the issue? Okay, so here's some points to make. And then they go out and then comes back, how did it go? Well, it did this, that, this. We'll coach them through it rather than intervening and dealing with it for them. Dealing with it for them. The adult interaction that your kids have with you, more and more should be you in the coach role rather than you as the one they're dealing with. Right? They should be interacting a lot with you as they're dealing with the world, as they're dealing with things out there, and you should give them things to deal with. And of course, they're coming back home, and then we're talking about it. You're coaching them up ahead of time. That's the relationship that you want to cultivate with your kids. many of you have your kids enrolled in school, of course, not because, like Trinity Classical, not because it's a perfect place. That's not why you enrolled your kids there. What a horrible reason to enroll your kids in a school. It's a perfect place. The richest parenting moments that Brenda and I had involved adults who weren't quite getting it right unto our kids, whether that, and that happened with coaches, that happened with teachers, that happened with bosses, all of those categories. And they were some of the sweetest times as parents around the dinner table, in the car, as we're talking about things, and you send them out, they're taking responsibility, and then you're guiding, watching them, and that responsibility gradually increases and the conversations grow more and more rich because they're dealing with the world and interacting with you. They're not dealing with you. Okay? You're not the thing that they have to deal with. The thing that they have to deal with is out there. I remember one of our daughters wound up working at the front desk at a hotel. And so she dealt with the customer complaints. And the stories she brought home, it was so great. She really got good at it. I think people need to get coaching from her, including us. There were times when complaining customers came to her, and then they left having been upsold several services, thanks to my daughter. But again, when they're in high school, they should be keeping track of assignments, deadlines. An anxious parent is going to say, well, if I leave it in their hands, the deadline might get missed. That's why your kids have deadlines, so that they can learn what happens when deadlines get missed. Don't try to intervene and remove the consequence. I remember when our girls, this was a challenge, but high school senior age, and a plan was hatched with girlfriends to go out of town overnight in a car that they were taking. And they were high school seniors. And I thought that was tough. Like, our little girls, and those friends. And they were good friends. They were good friends that they were going with. And Brenda and I prayed a lot. I thought of the consequences of saying yes, what could go wrong. But I also thought of the consequences of saying no. And the only reason to say no was, I'm scared, I don't trust you as a parent, that's kind of scary, and not prepare my daughter for the real world. I mean, this is a year after, she wound up being married just a couple of years after this. So when your kids are reaching that age, they should go on these sorties outside the house, and then you parent them. When I remember talking with my son he was around 15 years old, and I talked to him about when he would hang out with his friends. I said, okay, so you always need to check with us about what like if you're going to watch a movie, go over to a friend's house and you're going to stream some movie, we want to know what the movie is. When he reached age 16, I said, hey, I'm letting you know, you don't need to tell us what the movie is now. You need to investigate it for yourself. The thing is, you need to tell me how it goes. But it's your call whether it's an appropriate movie to watch. So the deal is, you're going to make the call, and you're going to tell me how it went. We're going to debrief after this one way or another. I get to decide whether this is a good movie or not, an appropriate movie or not. They should be making those decisions before they leave house. The long-term goal in terms of your relationship is think about how you want your kids relating to you when they're 30, when they're 40, and you're 20 years beyond that, 20, 30 years older than they are. My son, a couple years ago, he was 22, already married, and had a career track job as a mechanical engineer, and had a job offer to go somewhere else as a mechanical engineer. And he struggled with that. And so my son, who is a dad with a couple of kids and his wife, comes to me and says, "What do you think about this?" He had a big decision to make about a major job change, and he sought my input, which is a real blessing. My kids continue to seek my input as they're grown up. One of my sons now is an elder at a CREC church. And we've had a wonderful coffee talking shop about church leadership, father and son. Well, what are you doing when the kids are younger to make it so that the coaching relationship is what continues on into life? That relationship should be established before they leave home, and you have a modus operandi. So the kids are taking on the world, and then they talk to mom and dad, and the law of their mother and the counsel of their father is wise. And I need the counsel of my father, and that's a great blessing. So the point of all this is to parent with the end in view. Parent with the end in view. That's parenting in faith. And it shapes the way you talk around your kids, and it shapes the way you hand over responsibility to your kids. So think about both of those. Thank you very much.